thank everyone who's put this together and puts it together every week, virtually, across the globe, because I think it's a very important effort. And thank Helga for her opening remarks, which set the stage for my own in a very real sense. Um, I've been giving the annual talk to the League of Women Voters group in Williamsburg, Virginia, adjacent to my campus, the College of William and Mary, for 14 years. And I will do it again this year, probably for the last time, as I'll be 80 in about 14 days, and I'm slowing down considerably. But this time they asked me to speak on U.S. foreign policy. I've spoken on a number of topics in the 14 years, ranging from Korea to Ukraine to you name it, and I've probably spoken on it if it had geopolitical or geostrategic implications. This one is a dear one to my heart, if you will, because the empire, and I will refer to the United States of America as the empire because that is the title that historians will give it in the future when they look back over the history of empires. The empire has gone astray very badly. And foreign policy, its foreign policy, such as it is, sanctions and war, is the place where it's gone most badly astray in terms of visibility to the world. Not just the fact that we fight wars all the time, but the fact that we have fully 2 billion, maybe more people under our sometimes rather draconian sanctions. When you think about it, the rest of the world has very little reason to look at us with any positivity at all. Well, one of the things that they send out in this series, the League of Women's Voters, is published by the Foreign Policy Association, and it becomes the Great Decision series, if you will, and then the League of Women Voters puts together a talk on each of the subjects that are covered in the articles in their magazine. And the one that starts the magazine is the one that covers what I'm supposed to talk about in February. And it's entitled very well, America at a Global Crossroads. Now, the author of the article, G. John Eikenberry, a professor at Princeton University, doesn't know it, but the George Washington University has been using that title, or a reasonable facsimile thereof, for quite some time, and I've been participating in the seminars over there. And these seminars are designed to bring in, very important program, I think, mid-level bureaucrats from the Defense Department, from the Central Intelligence Agency, from the Director of National Intelligence's office, from the Federal Emergency Management Association, and all really of the key bureaucracies in the empire's government to talk to them about this inflection point, this crossroads that we're at. Well, G. John, in his article, Professor Eikenberry, starts out in a way that really got my hackles up because he starts out this way, and let me read it verbatim to you in terms of the first two sentences he uses in the first paragraph that got my hackles up. And you'll see how I addended his sentences as he wrote them. The first sentence is, quote, the U.S. polarized and divided, I admit that, faces a world overflowing with challenges, dangers, and uncertainties, period, for him. But I put on an extension of that sentence, and let me read the whole sentence for you now. The United States, polarized and divided, faces a world overflowing with challenges, dangers, and uncertainties, mostly of its own making. And then the second sentence, only two more sentences down, quote, China and Russia have stepped forward to challenge American leadership and the Western-oriented international order. Now, let me read that the way I changed it. China and Russia have stepped forward to challenge American leadership and the Western-oriented international order, semicolon, no. The American empire has stepped forward to arrest the inexorable shift of power, economic, financial, military, and otherwise, from the west to the east, with the magnet of that ship being China. Now you know how I feel about G. John Eikenberry's piece and how I'm going to try to more or less tear it apart when I speak to the League of Women Voters in Williamsburg. But let me get granular now for a moment with that sort of as a backdrop, and Helga's words too as an excellent backdrop. Chief Command Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Dennis Fritz, a good friend of mine, and I went over to the Senate Hart Office building on the 8th of January. And the reason we went over there was to join a group called Doctors Against Genocide, who were composed, as we understood it, have no reason to doubt this composition, of more than 15,000 medical personnel, many of them doctors who had themselves, pediatricians, surgeons, general physicians, worked in Gaza and knew of what they spoke when they began their protests against the genocide. We are assembled, they for the first time, as I understood it, and I had no reason to doubt them, for the first time in their lives, in a building representing what the Constitution designed for the U.S. in terms of government. Notice I didn't say empire. I said the United States, the Republic. We're in the office, the lobby of the offices of many of the most important people in the United States Senate. And we're there for a very express purpose. It's 9:30 in the morning. We're assembled. They're in their medical white tunics, got badges on that say Doctors Against Genocide, and a few signs, which of course Dennis and I knew was a violation of the new congressional rules. Don't know why they implemented these rules, but they did. You can't have any signs or placards in the congressional buildings. So we're kind of watching it develop, and all of a sudden, before even we can say anything or do anything or even make introductions, here come 20 to 30 Capitol Police with flex cuffs already out to put on people's arms behind their backs, with scowls on their faces, and telling these doctors, mind you now, these people have never been in these spaces before, maybe as individuals, but certainly not as the group called Doctors Against Genocide. And they're there with plans to go to various congressional offices and to talk to their members about the situation in Gaza. Understandably so, in my view. And so we're perplexed. We can't, the Command Chief Master Sergeant and I, I'll call him Chief Fritz and I, we're perplexed. What's going on here? And then the words came out of the Capitol Police's boss there. You have 30 seconds to disperse. You have a minute to do this, a minute to do that, get all your placards gone, take your tunics off, take your badges off, and so forth, or we're going to arrest you. And they said it with intent of forethought, if you will. So we're watching these people in frantic disarray now. They've planned this for probably weeks, if not months. They got all their paperwork, they got their schedules, the offices they're going to, and everything else, and all of a sudden they're in a panic, and I didn't blame them, nor did Dennis blame them for being in a panic. Well, about the time we're getting ready to go over to say something to these police, the doctors dispersed themselves without their papers in some cases, and clearly discombobulated, but they were going to the offices. They felt they'd get out of the fire of the Capitol Police if they just did what they said and went on to the first offices that they were going to visit. One of them happened to be Tammy Baldwin, Senator Tammy Baldwin's office. So we eventually gravitated over there with them. Made our complaints, of course, throughout the process. And later, Dennis and I would send an email to the general counsel of the Capitol Police. But basically, this was the way these people, all American citizens, all medical professionals, as I said, doctors, surgeons, pediatricians, and others who'd worked in Gaza, who really had a single point of mission, if you will, at that point, to try and get Dr. Abu Safia, who had been, for no apparent reason other than probably an assertion that he'd been helping Hamas within the hospital complex that he managed, that's my guess anyway, made a prisoner in the awful draconian system that Israel has for Palestinians. And I would assert that that system is probably a microcosm of, certainly not quite as vast as, Syria's, which was terrible. holding people underground and dark for 15 years, not feeding them, raping them periodically, subjecting them to all sorts of torture and so forth in the process of interrogating them. And here goes Dr. Abu Safia, who to that point, heading a hospital, I think in Rafah, if I recall, had been a real hero of the doctors, including these doctors, many of them who, as I said, had worked in Rafah too, and somewhere in Gaza, if not in Rafah. So we're totally puzzled till we get to this one office where we actually had a call with a congressman who you could say was more or less, and this is a minuscule proportion, sympathetic with our point. And what we learned from that congressman about our Congress and the movements afoot under Speaker Johnson, for example's tutelage, direction, and some other things that were coming out in the form of legislation that would, in our view, and I think any good lawyer's view, would prohibit freedom of speech and be constitutional violations, but we had no doubt would probably be backed up by the Supreme Court should it get to that level. Don't know that for sure, but its past experience with it would show that that's a possibility. And these are truly draconian things that they were going to do. They boil down to limiting the freedom of speech of American citizens if it had anything to do with Palestine, anything to do with Israel that was adverse. And of course, this congressman was himself frightened. He was frightened not only of these kinds of moves by the Congress, his Congress, but also by the fact that his job might be very tenuous indeed, because if he was going to stand up to this sort of stuff, he was going to make a target of himself. So I've gone from the height of geopolitical, geostrategic assessment, where we're not doing too well, thank you very much, down to the granular, where we're definitely not doing too well. To stay with that granular for a moment, I have every expectation that the best result we can expect from this ceasefire, even if it goes to 42 days, enters the next segment, and then the next segment, even if the hostages who are still alive are all returned, even if the Palestinian prisoners agreed to be released are in fact released, even if every single dot and T is crossed and dotted in this agreement, this ceasefire agreement, that that will happen is that the same thing that's happened on the West Bank, the same thing that's happened in East Jerusalem will happen in Gaza. That is to say, the Israelis will continue to settle that territory. They will do it brutally from time to time. They will go back to non-war status maybe, but they'll still do it brutally. And they've gained a new territory in which to do this, which they are increasing by kilometer after kilometer every day that goes by in the Syrian portion of the Golan Heights, and they will settle that too. So this is not going to do anything but slow down the juggernaut of Zionism, radical Zionism, that Bibi Netanyahu has represented ever since he came to the prime ministership, indeed, ever since he came to the finance ministership, and has been in a position of power. It will not stop. It will not stop under Joe Biden. It did not stop under Joe Biden. It won't stop under Donald Trump or any of the successors. So we're looking at not a joyous occasion for perhaps the beginning of a Palestinian state, a true Palestinian state process. We're just looking at more of the same, a little bit less deadly for Israel, because they were beginning to lose. They are having real problems with the Israeli Defense Force right now. They have people who aren't showing up for duty, especially reservists. They have people who are going to psychological and psychiatric treatment. They have a real problem with their economy. They have a significant problem even with Jews leaving Israel. It's not a safe haven anymore. Why would they not leave if it's not a safe haven? That's why they came there in the first place, to have the only safe haven on earth, as they would explain it, for Jewish people. It's not that anymore. And there are a lot of other problems too. And let me come back up again to the geopolitical and geostrategic area for a moment before I close. This is all part of the warp and woof of what Eikenberry asserts here, although I have to be fair to him and say that at the end he comes more or less to a conclusion much the same as Helga vouchsafed earlier, And that is that an ASEAN, if you will, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, peace, commerce, and trade being their purpose for existence, would be a better solution to all this crisis in the world than either side, East or the West, winning. But here's the empire's interpretation again. The East is winning. The East is inexorably winning. We're trying to overthrow the preliminary elections in Romania for Colin Georgescu. We are trying desperately to overthrow a political party in Georgia that has a tenuous hold on political power in Georgia because that party will not fess up to being pure NATO, pure empire, wants to maintain some balance between Moscow and the empire and NATO. They're going to get thrown out if we have our way. We have a congressman right now writing letters to Marco Rubio, giving him names of people in Georgia who support this party that has tenuous control and sanction them as individuals, as families, and as members of the government. Remains to be seen whether Rubio does that, but my bet will be that he does. We're trying to create turmoil from the Arctic Circle to the Antarctic glaciers that might be getting ready to go under climate change's duress and cause a 10 to 15-foot sea rise globally. We're not dealing with these kinds of problems which are facing us all existentially, as Helga said, the problem of nuclear weapons and a new build-out and a treatyless world, and people saying that they can win a first strike done nuclear conflict. Well, this is extremely dangerous, very dangerous for the empire, but the empire, as I said before in the beginning, is causing much of this duress and much of this challenge and much of this pain in the world. So that's my spiel for this morning, and my spiel from the top to the bottom and back to the middle and the top again is that the empire is responsible for most of this duress, most of this consternation, and the inability of the kind of future that Helga talked about that ASEAN represents. And there's a reason why Beijing uses, quote, the ASEAN community in Chinese as a descriptor for its approach to the world, rather than the approach of the empire, which is bombs, bullets, bayonets, and sanctions, or both simultaneously. We have to change that. Thank you.